In all the script and function that we saw so far, all the statements that we put into our script and function were executed one after another. This is not something that is always desired. So in this video, I want to talk about how we can choose between different statements in a script or function. So the command or the statement that do this job, they are usually called either selecting or branching command. MATLAB has two basic functions for doing that. We have the if command and then the switch command. The if command has also some uh, optional command associated with it, either else or else if. So usually in uh, if-else statements, we use statements that are logically either true or false, and we use those as conditions for a part of code to be executed or not. So these statements are usually called logical or relational commands. So you will see how we can use these type of command as conditions for if else statements. There are several relational operators that you can use in MATLAB. So we have greater than, we have smaller than, we have greater or equal, we have smaller or equal, we have equal, and finally we have the not equal operator. So let's just see some examples of how these operators work. So let's just check to see if 4 is smaller than 7. We know that that is the case. So when I execute this line, you see that the output is of type logical. You can see it in the workspace too. It's logical and its value is 1. What if I put it in reverse and I want to check if 4 is greater than 7? The answer to this is going to be a logical 0. You can do the same for characters as well. So usually with characters, you check whether to see their ASCII code is smaller or larger than some other character. So let's just check to see if the ASCII code of the lowercase a and the uppercase a are similar. And the answer to that is 0 because for each one of them a different ASCII code is being used. So now let's just use one with the equal sign as well. So let's just say if 4 is less than or equal to 7, and the answer to this is going to be 1 because 4 is smaller or equal than 7 to 7. In addition to the relational operators, we have some logical operators too that are very useful. We have the logical or, we have the logical and we have the logical not. So now let's see how these things can be used to basically combine some relational operators together. So let's just define a variable with value 5 and I want to check whether this value is greater than 7 and smaller than 7 and it's greater than -4. So the answer to this statement is going to be 1 because we have a to be less than 7 and also a is greater than -4. So now let's just change it a bit. Let's, instead of less than 7, let's just make it greater than 7. So even though the second part of this statement is true, but the first part is not true. So for the AND operator to be true, all the two operands need to be true. So if I execute this one, the answer to this question is 0 because a is not greater than 7 even though it is greater than -4. So now that we have these additional operators, the priority of the operators can be updated. So if you remember before, we only had a summation, subtraction, multiplication, division. So now in this current form, at the beginning, we have the parentheses, then we have the power, uh, we have parentheses, then we have power and the transpose, and then we have the not operator, then we have multiplication and division, the two types of division, then we will have plus and minus, then we have the colon operator, then we have the relational, then we have logical, which AND is first, then OR, and then finally we have the assignment. So this is the priority list of all the operators in MATLAB. So now that we saw the relational and logical operators, we can talk more specifically about if-else command. So to do that, let me just create a new script. So the general form of an if condition is if we have the condition here. Inside the if statement, we have some action that we want to perform, and finally we have end. So now let's see how this thing can be used. So let's just define a variable called number, and let's just assign a value of 5 to it. So as for the condition, I want to check if the value is positive or negative. So I just say if num is greater than or equal to 0, I can just fprint the value is positive, and then the new line. So let me just quickly save this if else script. Now if I run this, I made a mistake. It's going to be fprint. I save it again, I run it again, fprint sorry, fprintf. So let me just clear this. So let's run this. So we have a number to be 5, and we want to check if the number is greater than or equal to 0, and if that is the case, we want to print this message. So since the number is 5, this condition is satisfied, and that means the action inside the if statement will be executed. Now let's do it with -5 and see what happens then. If I run this, no message is being shown because this condition is not satisfied, and because this condition is not satisfied, this message won't be executed. So now let's just check to see if this number is, let's say, within a range. So let's just go with a number 10, and I want to check if this number is between 0 and 20. So as I said before, we can use a combination of relational and logical operators to achieve that. So if the number is greater than 0, and if the number is smaller than 20, and I can put both of these in parentheses. And now if I run this script, uh, it shows the message. So I can just change this. The value is between 0 and 20. So since the number that we provided is between 0 and 20, this message will be shown. Let's just check it with -10. And since the number is -10, this message is not going to be shown. Let's modify this script so it asks the user to provide a number. So if you remember from previous videos, we can use the input command to ask the user for a number or an input in general. So please input a number, and I suppress the output so it doesn't show the value that the user provides. Now let's say the function that we want to have is going to check whether the value is negative or not. So if the value is negative, let's just show a message that says we use the absolute value to compute the square root of the number. So since the number is negative, we use the absolute value. And then I replace the number with absolute value. And finally, we can have a printf the square root of number f is number f. And for the first placeholder, I use the number, and for the second one, I provide the square root of the number. So let's just save this and clear the command window. Let's just run it. So please input a number. Let's just put 51. Again with the spelling error. So save. Let me just put CLC on top. So please enter a number 51, and the answer is going to be the square root of 51 is 7.14 something. I can put the new line character, and I can also specify the number of bits that I want, the number of digits that I want to use. So let's just go for 3 for both the number and the square root. So if I rerun this one more time and I provide this time 56, now you can see it says that the square root of number 56 is 7.483. What if I provide the negative number? Let's just go with -87. And now, since this condition is satisfied, the message inside the if statement will also be shown. So since the number is negative, we use the absolute value, and then it says the square root of number 87 is 9.327. Even though the input number was negative, since here we replace the number with its absolute value, the next message is going to show the absolute value or the positive value of the input that we provided. So the previous if-else statement only accounted for one condition, but what if we have more conditions? So the general format for such a case is if condition action 1, and then else condition, basically the same condition is going to be action 2, and then we have end. So basically how it works is that it checks for a specific condition. If the condition is satisfied, action 1 is performed, otherwise action 2 is performed. So let's just go for an example of a script that asks for a user input for the radius, and depending on the value of the radius, whether is positive or negative, it either produces the area or it shows an error message. So let me just quickly write the function, write the script, and I will go through the explanation in a moment. So this is the script that I just wrote. So the first line, we have the CLC, which cleared the command window. Then we have clear all, which cleared all the variables in the workspace. Then it asks the user for an input radius. If the radius is less than or equal to 0, it shows a message that says this value for a radius is not a valid value. Otherwise, it uses the calc area function that we defined before to calculate the area of the circle, and then shows the area of the circle with the specific radius. So let's just run it and see how it works. So it asks the user for the radius. Let's just put a positive value, 12. And as you can see, it says the area of circle with radius 12 is 452.389. What if I provide an input which is negative? So if I just provide negative 54, then it says that negative 54 is not a valid radius. So as you can see, using if-else statement, we can choose between two sets of action that we can take. So now let's see what we need to do if we want to select between more than two different cases. So in this case, the general script can look something like this. So we have one if statement with action 1, then we can have else if condition 2 with action 2, we can have else if with condition 3 and action 3, and then finally we have one else with action 4, and then we use the keyword and to end the if-else statement. So let's just see an example of how this thing can be used. Let's just quickly write a function that accepts a number grade and change it to a letter grade. So to create the function, we need to have first the function keyword, and then let's just call the output variable to be letGrade, and I call the function letGrade as well, and as the input we have the grade itself. So now we need to have several conditions. So if grade is greater than 90, I just put the letter grade to be A. Else if grade is less than 90, less than or equal, so let's just put the equal here. So if it's less than 90 but it's greater than 80, so grade greater than 80, I can just put the letGrade to be B. Else if grade is less than 80 and it is greater than 70, I can put the letter grade to be C. Else if grade is less than 70 but it's greater than 60, greater than or equal to 60. I forgot to put the equal sign here. The letter grade will be as D. And finally else, which means that none of these conditions is satisfied, the letter grade is going to be F. And then I use the end statement to basically end the if-else statement. So now let's just quickly save this. As said before, the function name should be exactly the same as the name that you use for the M file. So I just save it. Hopefully there is no error. So now let's call this letGrade function with a value say 95 and see what is going to be the output. So with value 95, the answer is going to be A. Now let's do the same for 85. We have B. Let's do the same for 75. We have C. Let's do the same for 65. We have D. And let's do for 55 and we get F. So you might notice that we have two F's here, and that's the reason. That's because I didn't suppress the output here. So if I clear this and rerun it with 55, now I only get one F as the output. So this is how you can use if, else if, and else statement to go and check several conditions. If else statements are not the only statement that give us the capability to select between different actions. There is another statement called a switch statement that can give us the same capability and can be used instead of if and else statement. So let's just see what is the general form of a switch statement. So we have the keyword switch, and then we have some expression that needs to be evaluated. Then inside the switch we have different cases. So we have case 1, which if it's satisfied, action 1 is executed. Then we can have another case, case 2. If that is satisfied, action 2 is executed, and this thing can go on for several more cases. And finally we have the otherwise keyword that give us the option to execute action n. And then at the end we have the end keyword. So now let's go for an example to see how we can use switch statements. Let's write a short script that gives the user some options and asks the user to basically select from those options, and depending on the options that the user chooses, different messages is being shown. So let me just quickly clear this script. As usual, I put CLC and clear all here. So let's just define a variable called choice, and we tell the user to enter a number between 1 and 5 and 9. So now we just use switch statement to see which one is being used. So as the expression for switch, we use our variable. So now it's the time to check for different cases. So if 1 is selected, we just display a short message that says 1 is selected. We can have the second case, which is 5, and if 5 is selected, we just write the message that says 5 is selected. We can have case 9, which shows the message that 9 is selected. And then finally we can have otherwise, which only is executed if none of the above cases are selected. So we can just type follow the instructions. So let's just put the end keyword to end the switch statement. So let me just quickly save it. Let's just say switch example. So now if I run it, the user is prompted to select between 1, 5 and 9. So let's just provide 5, and as you can see, this case is being executed because 5 is selected, and the message 5 is selected is going to be displayed. Of course, I have some minor errors too, and that is usually the case for programming. So now let's go for another example. Let's just provide 10. And as you can see, none of these first cases are selected. Therefore, the otherwise will be executed, and the message is follow the instructions. If you want to make the selection process much more visually pleasing and graphical, you can use the internal function menu in MATLAB that give you this capability. So let's just modify the script that we had before. So let's just redefine the variable choice, and then we use the internal function menu. So the first set of a string that you can provide to the function is basically the instructions that will appear on the menu that you create. Then we have the first option, which is 1, the second option, which is 9, and the third option, the second option, which is 5, and the third option, which is 9. And then we can add the fourth option, and we call it none, to basically do not select any of the numbers. So what happens in the menu function is that after showing this message for the instruction, it creates 4 different buttons, and the text on each one of these buttons is the string that we just provide here. So for the first button, when you press it, value 1 will be returned. For the second button, value 2 will be returned. So again, this is the string that is going to be on top of the button, not necessarily the output that it provides. Then this one will return a value of 3, and finally this one will return a value of 4. So because of this, we need to modify the cases that we have as well. So if case 1 happens, that means that the first button is selected, which is the value 1. If case 2 happens, that means the second button is selected, which is in our code equivalent to value 5, and finally for the third button it is the value 9. And finally, if the none button is selected, we should show the otherwise message, which is follow the instruction. So let's just quickly run this code. As you can see, this menu is created on the top left corner. So let's just select 9 button. As you can see, when you select the 9 button, which is the third button, case 3 is going to be executed, and it shows the message 9 is selected. Let's just run it one more time, and this time I press the none button. So when the none button is selected, since the none button is the fourth button, and 4 is not one of the cases that we evaluate, the otherwise statement will be executed, and it shows the message follow the instructions. MATLAB has a series of functions called is functions, which are also being used to check whether something is true or not. So there is a long list of functions in this category. So you can have, for example, is diag, which checks whether a matrix is diagonal, is equal, which checks whether arrays are numerically equal, or for example is integer, that checks whether an input is an integer array or not. So let's just quickly see some examples of how this thing works. For example, let's use the function is letter and pass the letter A to it in a string form and see if this is a letter or not. As you can see, since lowercase a is a letter, the output is going to be a logical value with value 1. So now let's just pass a number to it. Let's just go for 4. And as you can see, 4 is not a letter. Of course, this is the numerical 4. What if we want to check if the character 4 is for a letter or not? And the answer to that question is going to be also 0. So this can give you the capability to even build more complexity into your MATLAB functions and scripts. In this video, I went over some of the basic concepts that are commonly used in MATLAB functions and scripts for selecting and branching in the program that we write. We use if-else statement, if-else statement. We saw how else if can be used. We saw how we can use switch statement. We saw how we can use the internal function menu to provide a basic graphical user interface to select between some input, and we also briefly talked about the is series functions that are common in MATLAB. In the next video, I will go over the concept of loops and how to perform repetitive procedures in MATLAB.